Greetings, everyone! It is I, Tentasnar Ben Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's another exciting day. We're talking more tabletop. Today, we're continuing with the series that I'm going to honestly call, because the alliteration is rocks and helps a lot, the Golarion Gazetteer. I'll never pronounce that one right there. But basically, it's my tour through all of Golarion. And I will eventually make a full video talking about the planet of Golarion, and probably some of its continents. But for now, we're going country by country, because these are the major countries where, honestly, if you are either in a game or planning a game, you could have some adventures in Golarion, in your Pathfinder world. And all of these have very unique feelings. Last time, of course, we visited Ustalov, which is horribly cursed because a lich owned it for a long time. Today, it's Druma. And Druma has its share of problems. There was a apocalyptic event called the Earthfall, which screwed everything up. They didn't avoid that. But certainly, through its interesting history, it has found itself in a point in time that is relatively stable. I've used Druma in the past in an adventure that I ran. My first time I tried 2nd edition Pathfinder. One of the reasons that I was very interested in trying it today and talking about it. It's the second country that I've had the most experience with. Probably we could also add the Shackles in, but that's kind of not a country and a combination of islands under one kind of banner, but that's an entirely different discussion. So, let's kind of dive into Druma here. Let me throw myself up in the corner here, because I'm going to start out with a really good one here. I'm going to show you a picture of Druma. This is Druma itself, the entire country. Now, as you can see, with its measurement down the corner, that's 100 miles across. Druma itself, not a very large nation. It's maybe perhaps like a couple hundred feet north and south, and maybe like 150 miles wide. Relatively small area, nestled in a bunch of different mountain ranges. It tends to be very hilly with some areas of plains. It's geographically kind of a non-starter, I would say. There isn't a lot to it. It does have the Lake Encarthian, the largest in-water lake in the continent there, to the north, which makes it a very great place for trade, of course. And there's a lot of trade routes to Eisger nearby along the inner sea route. So it is a very trade-rich area. The other big thing that Druma has is minerals. Gems and precious metals and a lot of other things. They're very rich mineral deposits. So they're always have stuff to export. Remember, a lot of mountains, a lot of hills. That makes it really good. Of course, again, Lake Encarthian to the north, 5 King Mountains are to the east and south, which is the Dwarven nations. And of course, west is to Multhun. And that's the only one that kind of doesn't have a geographical feature to block it out. It's just got this kind of like little breadbasket area. And yes, there is some areas of agriculture, but a lot of the hilly terrain makes it so agriculture isn't great in Druma. Alright. There's a lot to break down when it comes to Druma itself. And that's what makes talking about it a little difficult here. Let's see here. Let's see if that's the right one. No, that's not. Well, it's not popping over top of it. There you go. There's Druma's crest. So I'm going to show that off there. We'll go away from it for a second there. Let's talk history of Druma. That's probably the best place to start when talking all about it before we talk about how it exists nowadays. Because its history is a very tumultuous one. The oldest history we know about Druma goes back to a group known as the Mercadi Blade Culture, Macready. As you can see, in the center of the country is this nice little place called Macready. The reason that the culture is named after it is because the artifacts from this culture were discovered in Macready. So, yes, they found some weapons. They're referred to as, archaeologists in modern-day Golarion refer to it as Mercadi Blade Culture. And what is known about it is that these are a branch of the Kellid people, which is a major ethnic human group in Golarion. That's an important thing to say about Kelids, a lot of more modern Kelids all the time are referred to as barbarians, because a lot of modern ones are more in some of the more savage areas. Therefore, that they have a very had a very harsh cultures and have some things about them that are. It's a culture that is very diverse and complex, is the best way to say it. So we got some ancient Kelids who came here as basically nomadic pastoralists. This is after the ancient Serpent Folk Empire collapsed, and these group kind of built together. These nomad agriculture people in this territory came together as a single culture. And that's the society we talk about when we talk about the Macready Blade culture. And we know that the evidence has that they have, from archaeology in Golarion, they had extensive trade networks that they used Lake and Cardin for. They have stuff that marks things from places like Atash, the World's Edge Mountains, wood carvings from Kionin, freshwater shells from the Lake of Mist and Veils. So it's like we know they traded with people because of this artifactual evidence. And it shows their culture spreading. And they had a lot of working in copper and gold. They built very well. And an important thing here is Palakar Forest. They were the first humans to have a good kind of connection with them. Palakar Forest is a very wild forest, and a lot of Fae are there. We'll talk about the Palakar Forest a little later on today, but just know it's a place that's effectively not settled. It's controlled by Fae. And there was the original deals of harvesting for compensation that existed here with the Macready Blade people. So they had prosperity. They had some stone cities and brick earthenwork and things like that. There are some mounds that are found throughout Druma that are ruins of these ancient cities. They had petrographs. They built culture and developed into a civilization. They have some artwork, various different things. And they did have, assumed what it seemed like to have some kind of single government, not really single government, but like independent communities that had a similar culture, and they had a lot of intermarriage between these communities that kept them close together. So it's sort of like they built like city-states almost, or small communities in this area. Thassalon talks about them. That's an important thing. Thassalon mentions the existence of them and gives some information. But again, Thessalonians, never had very good ideas of other cultures. The people they sent there, a bunch of them got killed because they got into trouble with the Palakar Fae, as far as we can tell. They depicted these as Keld barbarians who summon monsters to devour their foes. It's a very kind of dark look from another culture, but it's a very them-first culture. We might have to do an episode talking about ancient Thassalon, ancient Aslan, and a lot of these ancient civilizations that have ruins in Golarion, because it's interesting to talk about them. But, so, what happened in Macready Blade Society, the civilization of them? Earthfall. That's the best thing to do it. The meteorite impacts caused uplift of mountains, a lot of issues, the decades-long winter from the ejected material, plant life died, the agricultural systems fell apart, famines, thousands died, this civilization broke down, and those that survived this destruction became nomads like the original Kelids that lived in this area. So they no longer were the Macadian Blade civilization. They returned to more of a Kelid way of life, though kind of a different version of it. Which this lasted for a while, until orcs showed up. So, one of the facts is, orcs and dwarfs were both subterranean species. But the dwarfs, during their history, which maybe talking about some of these major ancestries' histories would also be a good thing, for future Gazetteer episodes. They had this entire thing called the Quest for the Sky. It was them basically fighting their way from the area in the Darklands, basically their version of the Underdark, fighting their way to the surface and having to battle their way through the orcs, and driving them out of the Darklands to the surface. So, while they're doing the pressure from below, orcs showed up. And orcs, well, weren't very happy. They're invaders. And remember, orcs were like people. They're battle-like people. They basically got into fights with the Kellid clans. They were scattered, though, after Earthfall. They didn't really have resistance. And so there was some time period with the orcs basically trying to, battle it out and control the territory and conquering human clans until the dwarfs then showed up. Because guess what was following behind these orcs? The dwarfs. And they drove the orcs out of this area, and what's left of the human clans were basically bloodied, dispersed. They were already on the outs and out because of Earthfall. This just kind of drove them about. The dwarfs now had a pretty advanced culture. The fact is, remember, the dwarfs, they were underground when Earthfall happened. A lot of the major issues that happened didn't affect them. So they had a pretty well-developed culture at this point in time and saw the scattered humans who were left after Earthfall, even these generations later, as honestly primitives. They first started kind of offering them aid, which is a little condescending. But again, they needed territory. They conquered the land. They were the ones that named it Druma. It's thought to be a bastardization of a local word meaning Silver Shore, and this formed the Dwarven Empire of Targadith. I might be butchering that one for a while there. But that was like a nearly 6,500 years culture that formed here. And this empire exists. So, Druma became the agricultural basket with a little bit of mining, but not a lot. Because remember, dwarves are miners, and there was plenty of materials there. They had all their major mines established in the mountain homes that they emerged from. So this area here was better just to be agriculture, honestly. Sure, they could mine it too, but they already had them too. And there were problems. Kelds had their own practices. There were oftentimes problems with violent reprisals from the dwarfs. Basically, the dwarfs became landowners. And the Kelds became, honestly, indentured servants, is a good way of saying about it. They paid taxes to the dwarfs at this point in time. So, were they enslaved? Technically not. They weren't treated well. They were locals who happened to live here. That we own the place now. We won't kick you out if you work for us. So, dwarves really weren't doing great. And, there was a lot of issues. Vigilantism. There were some crackdowns in the Keldan religion because a lot of some of these issues that occurred between the dwarves and the Kelds were religious-based. And, yeah. Because, this dwarven governor, just the one that kind of opened with it, led to the first of the Drumish rebellions. Basically in 4866. This was the first big one. And those that were in charge, the speakers as they were called, fled to Isgar across Lake Encarthen. And these exiled priests were known as martyrs and symbols of the Keldan cultural autonomy within Druma. Because speakers are important figures within Druma, Keldan culture. The dwarves also clashed with the Fae, of course, which, caused plenty of issues. Satyrs were kidnapping dwarfs. There was a war between them, known as the Charcoal Wars. Destroyed a quarter of the forest, but the dwarfs couldn't maintain their attempts to basically clear-cut everything and get charcoal for their furnaces. So, hey, the Fae won the Charcoal Wars because it cost too much for the dwarfs. The Fae weren't spending money. They lived there. The dwarfs just didn't want to spend money on it. Turns out, that's how they won. So, again, these conflicts continued for millennia. You have to remember I said it was like 6,500 years of Targeted. So, and that started in 4890. We kind of skip ahead here of thousands of years of having the control here to around 1113. During this time, dwarfs did engineering, aqueducts, roads, draining a marsh, building cities. They developed the country in a way. It was, there were places that, some dwarfs were not welcome in, like the Sky Citadels, and so a lot of dwarfs came here in these areas. This was also a bunch of conflicts. There was another conflict against the orcs, and 2 more rebellions. The first one ended because of the death of a powerful war leader. The second one because of a famine. So we've had 3 rebellions by the Drumish people. None have worked. Now, here is when Taldor comes into mind. Taldor, is around now. It is in existence now. But Taldor as an empire, has had a lot of years of it. The empire's fallen from its glory, but it came into existence during this time, around that negative 1000 AR. And, this is a thriving human empire. It begins to have, conflicts with the dwarfs. And, again, this kind of human-centric idealism entering into the Druman people, the Kells of the Druman people, and more taxes, tariffs, and edicts against them, has a 4th rebellion. And they were aided from warbands from Isgar and Castellion, but again, the rebellion ends in failure. Now we're at 113 AR. We have passed the negative mark. And the emperor at the time, Herganar of the Dwarven people, basically demanded the Drumish people be denied beards and beer, so that the Drumish men can't grow facial hair or consume alcohol. Edict was repealed after that guy's death, but there's a tradition within the Drumish culture now that many Drumish men are clean-shaven and abstinent. And in turn, though, something happened with the women, though. A counterculture developed within the women of the Druman Empire that they would drink, debate, and perform music, that they have symposias now. So this is very interesting that there is this development of very differing sides of a culture, that the major drinking, more partying force is the women of Druman culture, while the men shave and are abstinent. Interesting thing about the Drumans. And this is still rooted in modern Drumish culture in Golarion. If you're from Druma and a man, you probably are clean-shaven. Or you think of that as the way to go. And honestly, you probably don't drink. Now, granted, if you're an adventurer, maybe you've explored beyond your initial culture, but that wouldn't have been a thing growing up. While, if you're a woman from Druma, probably went to a bunch of these, debates that were, intellectual debates, had some musical performances, and got shit-faced. Very interesting dichotomy between the sexes in Druma that is kind of interesting, that the way that they've kind of developed because of these cultural things, because, again, Dwarven has some sexism built into it, at least during this time. Got better. During this time period, pretty bad now. Now, 4th rebellion has failed. We reach something that's a major force within Druma, and that's the prophecies of Kalistrade being born. What are these? I will talk about them in a minute, but just know this. There is a religious movement that is really only in Druma. That's it. And effectively, in 187 AR, this prophet, Kalistrade, was born. He went on a journey. He came back with wealth and a kind of very strict style. Had a cult form around him. Disappeared around 251. His collection of journals, writings, letters, and all that became basically the early version of the prophecies of Kalistocracy. And eventually his tomb was discovered in 408, and it became a big religious movement. A religious movement which is all about earning wealth. But here's the thing about the prophecies of Kalistocracy: they're about earning wealth long term. Short-term gains are not important and are not a good thing for their culture. They believe that it is conservative wealth gain. It's all about the long term. So it's not only am I gaining wealth, I'm making sure to accumulate wealth to pass on to the next generation appropriately. That kind of thing. And to the other people around me. It's a kind of thing. Now, there was a splinter group from this that's a lot more about giving and generosity, called the Golden Solidarity, that exist. But guess what happened to them? They were kind of not looked upon very well, so they ended up going to an island that got Kalistron. It got murdered by Tar-Baphon. Everyone's favorite necromancer turned ultra-lich turned controller of Ustalov shows up again and massacred the shit out of the Golden Solidarity. And honestly, the Kalistocrats, basically the aristocrats of the prophecies of Kalistocracy, looked at it as a cautionary tale. Is, generosity doesn't really lead you the right path, apparently. Too much giving and generosity, not great. So, Kalistocracy's faith became a big one here. And, there was some favor in Eredin when he became a living god and the god of humanity, but they kind of survived. And Eredin's entire stuff was a rallying point against Dwarven rule. So it was important to the Druman people still. But the prophecies of Kalistocracy still did hold some support of the people. But the thing is, they didn't push the kind of rebellions the same way that Eredin's people did. So when things went to bad and there was rebellions and stuff, guess what happened? Eredin's faith kind of driven out. The prophecies kind of remained there, Again, also, it was a big thing that Eredin's followers from other areas in the world wouldn't come to Druma's rescue. There was a lot of that, we're going to serve Eredin, we're going to rise up, the rest of Eredin's people will come to our rescue. Didn't happen. So, we get to 1551, and Kardath basically has weakened. After 6,500 years, this Dwarven Empire, there's some orc attacks. It splits into the 5 kingdoms. There are 5 Dwarven kingdoms, and they go into a civil war at 1571. And particularly some of these kingdoms, a lot of these kingdoms, and particularly Sagarak, levied harsh taxes against the Drumans, sparking the 5th rebellion. The thing is, the Drumans technically won that one, but they didn't free themselves of the dwarfs in this 5th rebellion. They only won enough to lessen tax burden. But again, prophets of Kalistocracy profited off this. They had begun connecting because, again, they're merchants. So who are they selling to? Well, they're selling technically to the dwarfs. Well, there's something going on here. They were supportive of the thing, but they were selling things to the dwarfs. Now, this isn't during the rebellion per se, but this is financial and material aid to the dwarven armies. And this also kind of led to, there was some more Kelds that showed up in Druma. In 2133, there was an immigration of a bunch of Iscari Kelds. They were fleeing Taldor's army expansion at the time, and this was more independent sentiment in Druma. There was a minor Sixth Rebellion, and, it saw the formation of a small group, the Medicrocracy of Jihad in Druma South, but that fledgling nation refused to trade with the Daldans or the Dwarves. It was impoverished, and eventually one of the Dwarven kingdoms basically just crushed it in a lull between the Civil War. So, here's where the prophecies of Kalistocracy's plan comes to a head. Because guess what? For, relatively a couple thousand years, they've been wheeling and dealing with the dwarfs. The dwarfs, for 800 or so years, have been in a massive civil war. And what happens when you're in a civil war? Well, you can't pay off all your debts. You have to borrow money. So these Kalistocrats basically had gotten a significant debt with the dwarven governments. And here's where it comes into play. They basically force all 5 kingdoms to negotiate for Druma's independence in exchange for forgiving their debts in something called the Curse Accords that were signed in 2332. The thing about the Curse Accords is it's also where all 5 dwarven kingdoms end their civil war. So not only did the prophecies and the prophets of Kalistocracy basically use massive amounts of debt to get all 5 of these kingdoms to the table, it got them to sign a peace treaty and then say, good, you're all at peace. We get this land here. So, because they brokered peace, they were able to get a land. Yeah. And they formed a Council of the 5 Kingdoms, but that's an entire different thing. That's the 5 Kingdom Mountains, which we'll have to talk about another time. And, there were some parts of the treaty that the Druma still used. They included in some mining rights in the 5 Kings Mountains. So, mining rights were good to get. Now, granted, the 5 Kings didn't last too long. Orcs murdered all but one of the cities later on, but that's an entirely different problem for if we talk about the 5 Kings Mountains and all its glory and how they exist, today. That's a later's us kind of thing. But for now, we have to know the Curse Accords created Druma. Yep. Anyway, so let's talk about modern day Druma then, because again, it's been a while now. They've got independence. The dwarves and Taldor are recognizing them as a new class, and the Kalistocrats basically remember the prophets of Kalistocracy, their religion based around money. And the people in charge of them are these Kalistocrats, basically aristocratic merchants. They rule the place. There were some issues in the startup. There was a set of riots with this new ruling class, but they relaxed taxes, and they actually set up in their system, there's opportunities for upwards mobility for the basic people. They actually have that in Druma because it's a capitalistic society. They established that, and things went well, actually. The country flourished. There is some lingering issues with dwarven rule and some things like that, because, again, thousands and thousands of years of dwarfs basically making your entire people indentured servants in their farmlands. It, kind of makes you very upset. And so there was a lot of issues with Druma and things going on in the world that they tended to have very cold relationships with the dwarfs. And, the dwarfs kind of had the same They were very unhappy, especially when the Five Kingdoms collapsed with the Orcish attacks. They didn't get any aid from Druma. They didn't like that. So the dwarves established like trade routes with Chelix. They circumvented Druma altogether. Druma had trade routes with the Shining Crusade. And all of this kind of happened until Droskar's Crag crippled the city of Tar Canardum, and Ordak Targa seized control of an ailing empire. Basically, it was conquered. And then Druma did something, opened up their door to thousands of dwarven refugees. And this, honestly, has helped rebuild a lot of those bridges between the two people. And, Druma has done a lot of, warmongering when it's necessary. They invested in Chelix Everwar, traveling caravans along the path of Argonel, many other ventures. And the fact is, because they have no actual god in their religion is money. When Eredin, the god of humans, the living god, basically died, they actually fared pretty well. While a lot of countries had shit happen, they've stayed very well. They had to, figure out mercantile networks and trade routes and trade partners during that time, but, they fixed it up. And so, they did involve themselves in the Goblin Blood War, too, which was in fairly recent history. That was a big one, where they sent their blackjackets into the conflict, which we'll talk about the blackjackets, too, still today. So there's Druma's history in a nutshell. Starts off as a bunch of Keldon people. Shit goes down during Earthfall. Dwarfs come in, rule them for millennia, and, their attempts to rebel to get freedom don't work. A merchant religion forms. The merchant religion play the long game. It's part of their religion. And you know what they eventually do? Get a lot of depth with the dwarfs, and basically we've come to collect our debt. So, Druma, modern day. It's run by the Resplendent Bureaucracy. It's the organization directly responsible for running the nation. It does value wealth above all else, so very few people, feel like that it's staying in that job, because it's steady pay, but there really is an opportunity for personal wealth. And remember, personal wealth and gain is an important part of the Prophecies of Kalistocracy. So, there's only really one bureaucrat that stays in the job permanently, and that is the High Prophet, which the current one is Kalidor. So, bureaucracy is not usually taken by our rich merchants. The High Prophet is not merely a job. It's basically, all about controlling a bunch of wealth-obsessed merchants and political connections to gain it. And so, the High Prophet is honestly one of the most powerful men in the Inner Sea region. And the bureaucrats are basically lesser things. But so, we have a resplendent bureaucracy, as it's called, which all its members and a lot of the population of Druma are basically followers of Prophecies of Kalistocracy. So, everybody in the government, most of our people, part of it. And a lot of that religion goes to the rules, structures, and laws that the country goes by. So you have these merchant lords who work part-time at being lords while they do their other business ventures, many of which only serve 8 to 10 years before they move on to more profitable opportunities, sometimes less. You never know. It's business. But there are some stay there for more steady income, but it's very undrumish to stay for steady income. That's the kind of thing about it. And, again, lifetime service other than the High Prophet doesn't really exist. It's even rarer. Let's talk about the High Prophet here, because then we'll talk about the prophecies after we talk about Keldor, the current High Prophet of the Prophecies of Kalistocracy, and basically the leader of Druma. Effectively, the Prophecies of Kalistocracy, it's got a pope kind of character, and that pope is effectively leader of Druma. Druma is comparable to the Vatican City in our world. Except they don't believe in God, they believe in money. So it is a little different there. Keldor is probably one of the best high prophets that the prophecies of Kalistocracy have had in generations. The thing is, he's an oracle. So he combines his oracle, his divine magic as an oracle, with some of his perceptive mind and basically knowledge to give him power that's almost prophecy. He can use his magic to kind of see things going on in Golarion, takes his perceptive abilities to basically predict what's going on and make really powerful decisions for Druma and his own wealth. He's got this master of social and economic necessities, and he is probably one of the wealthiest Kalistocrats with no sign of his wealth diminishing, only gaining even in his position. The thing is also, he's very long-reaching. He's got schemes that span the continent. He wants to maintain peace in the Inner Sea is the other thing, too. Because war is not good for a country to get into. Sure, individual merchants can sell things during a war. Druma's not a big, I'm a war profiteer country either. So that's the thing is, let's try to maintain peace. Another thing, though, is make sure Druma's ready in case of war. So, he also recognizes allies are important. So he actually knows every major political leader and civil leader in Avastian Garund by name. He knows a lot of other major players. Granted, low profile in the world affair. He's not about it for the fame, only the wealth. And he's very friendly and calm most of the time. And he knows how to interplay these non-financial factors, which are important for obtaining and maintaining wealth. Because financial factors are important, but there are things that are outside of finances that help you obtain and maintain wealth. He understands that. The Everlasting Palace, in the capital of Curse, he doesn't really leave it. He has his elite members of the Mercenary League. We'll talk about them. And then uses magic to communicate with other people. He spends his days checking letters, bringing in, preparing his spells, talking to aides and foreign leaders. And, he keeps in contact with other heads of state very often. And has foreign officials come into the palace to discuss sensitive topics, something that a lot of his predecessors didn't do. He is very big on the global stage. And a big thing is, the High Prophet and a lot of the prophecies of Kalistocracy group have been basically buying up a lot of Eisger and making an investment. We'll see how that goes. Last thing to talk about him is basically his background is kind of null. It's kind of disappeared. No one knows a lot about him before he became the High Prophet. And that's not that he's done a few things. New ship designs in the shipyards of Detmer, and the Mercenary League, a combination religious and army of Druma, religious army and army of Druma, has doubled its training and recruitment. And he also withdrew support of Last Wall. Something's going on that he predicts. So, and we'll show off a picture of Kalistocracy here. We can throw him out here. Just as a little bit of thing there. Is that the one? No, it's this one. There he is. That is High Prophet Kalistocracy. And here's what one of the prophets of Kalistocracy look like. Oh. So that's kind of the way they dress. Just a little image there for you to check out. So, let's talk about the prophecies of Kalistocracy. Because, honestly, we need to know about them if we are going to talk about Druma as a whole. Because, again, they are the religion and the government of Druma. So it all started with Kalistocracy. He had like dream records, esoteric, mystic writings. It was during the early age of enthrallment. This man and his philosophy was kind of seen as a prophet. His teachings and predictions and stuff like that. And his predictions might be similar to our current high prophet, of course, Kellador. Think about that. Kellador has near prophetic ideas because he knows how to read people and uses a combination with his oracle magic to find out stuff and then uses his knowledge to basically predict things. So, a well-worn traveler that probably was an oracle and a merchant could easily have been started this one. So it's all about white robes, white gloves. You do not have contact with those that don't follow the philosophy. There are sexual and dietary prohibitions also to the prophecies. You sacrifice, you bring personal wealth and success later in life. And those that do not achieve such greatness have broken some of the teachings. There are technically atheists, weren't affected by the death of Aridin, of course, because of such things. So, big goals, prohibitions, conserve resources, make sure you don't use a lot, wear white, avoid charity, only give money to those that earned it. Basically is what it is. Things like they prefer indentured servants with 1-year terms over slaves. Because they feel like the servant get labor and they can repay the loans. So that's kind of their ideas. They want things that have actually more profit built into them. So that's part of the avoid charity. Avoid material comforts. Here's the thing. They avoid a lot of basic comforts, even though they can afford them. They have a strict diet and abstain from several types of meat. Think about that. Rich, but you're being relatively moderate about it. Avoid a lot of physical contact. Basically be lawful neutral. That's a big thing is. Exploit agreements. Basically take care of loopholes. If there's a legal loophole, don't break the rules. Exploit it, though. And always try to outwit your superiors for profit. That's a big thing, too, is, outwit your superiors for profit. Don't get not a lot of sexual activity, not a lot of tattoos even, too. So, it doesn't matter your ancestry, your gender, financial barriers, anybody's welcome in. You just have to follow the path, basically. They have some death rituals and things like too. Of course, the high prophets. And, of course, their faith is weird. It's very different kind of faith. So, there are certain religions they get along with, certain they don't. That kind of thing. That brings us back to Druma as a whole, because guess what? Druma as a whole doesn't really have other religions. Granted, other religions are tolerated in Druma, but they're not encouraged by the government. So, again, not everybody that's a citizen of Druma is a follower of the prophecies of Kalistocracy. And the problem might be that non-believers in the prophecies might find business more difficult in the city and dealing with these people more difficult. So it's kind of honestly encouraged. And, you don't really find the prophecies of Kalistocracy most anywhere outside of Druma. Their conditions in Druma are perfect for them. Outside that really isn't great. Basically, you maintain personal wealth in order to justify your celestial order. Displays of wealth are predominant among the citizens of Druma. And so it's basically, when you display wealth for everybody kind of thing, not just for you. And they tend to be gaudy. So, brickwork made with gems, or statues that are made of precious metals, things like that. Now, granted, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't maybe possibly wear jewelry to show off your wealth too. But we'll talk about robbing and stuff too. But before we really dive into that, we should also probably talk about the military of the Prophecies of Kalistocracy and the military of Druma, the private military force known as the Mercenary League, or as they are sometimes called, the Black Jackets. So, yeah. They're ruthless, have extensive training, lavish equipment. They're black cad man-at-arms that are basically so fanatic and so fervorish. You know, their loyalty to the prophecies and to Druma, you know, people say they're matched by only golems, which are things that you have magic just to control. They draw from members of the prophecies who, basically because of circumstances, aren't able to have wealth accumulation. So it's basically, you remember the prophecies, you've got circumstances, you know you can't gain the wealth that the prophecy talks about. This is an opportunity for you to kind of go into something and still be of service to your religion. Again, also, some violent or sociopathic individuals end up in there, you know, because they are kind of awful, but they're basically, they have no morals when it comes to fighting. It's all about following the orders, and they choose tactics with the most efficient outcome. Meaning, if it's not great tactics, they're still gonna do them. Yeah. So, yeah, their black uniform and black coats are one of the reasons they are seen, which is kind of the opposite of your average members of the Prophecies of Kalistocracy, which are clad all in white. And they are basically an army that is certainly great for Druma and the prophecies. They are devoted, of course, to the resplendent bureaucracy completely and utterly. They are, think of it as, they are fervent in their following this because they're religious fanatics in a religion on money. It's a really strange thing. These are military religious fanatics that serve the prophecies in Druma. And they get a lot of duties, too. They can do things like, there's an elite guard that, guards the High Prophet. You know, they're responsible for guarding caravans and trade expeditions around the Inner Sea. They're in charge of protecting their cities and their people of the country of Druma. Druma is wealthy. It attracts attention. Let's talk about a couple places in Druma here, because that's probably a great place to end off here. Unlike Ustalav, which I talked about previously, where it had a lot of smaller counties with lords under them, there are a couple of major cities and towns and locations that we can talk about here in this place here. The first off is Curse. Remember the good old Curse Accords? When that was signed, a city was formed there. That's basically it. It's the treaty city. And it is the capital. It is a coastal city. We crashed there for a second, so this will be in two parts for those of you watching on Twitch, and I'll just put them together for those that watch on YouTube then. So, I was talking about Curse. I don't see where we stopped. I hope that we didn't miss too much of there for a little bit of a crash on OBS. But regardless, I was talking about the capital of Druma, Curse, which is in the Bay of Accords. Curse was founded as part of the Curse Accords, of course. The bay named after the Accords, Curse named after the location it was at. So, it's at the edge of the... Okay, so not too long. We're good. It's the Gulf Accord. Prophets flow, the major river that kind of flows through Druma and kind of distributes the curse on the two sides of it there. It's got four major districts. The Manor District, which is the kind of residential area along the northeastern edge. The Resplendent District, which is where many of the government bodies are. The Northwestern District is the Trade District, where a lot of the most vibrant markets in all of Golarion are. If you want to go somewhere and you want to buy something, you go to the trade district in Curse, basically. And of course the pilgrimage district, which is honestly leased out to anybody not affiliated with the Office of Kalistocracy. It's a place if, you want to join the religion, you can. Otherwise, it's a place where non-religious people go to live. There's the Prophet's High Sanctum here, which is an artificial island where the High Prophet has his home. And it's technically outside the laws of both Curse and Druma. Technically. That's one of those things. It's technically considered that. And it's the High Prophet's island, owned by the High Prophet. Yeah. All Drumish cities have displays of wealth. Just kind of show off the wealth of the people there. They are all horribly ostentatious. It's required almost in a city. But Curse goes above and beyond. Most common of dwellings resemble manor houses, municipal buildings and homes of the upper class resembling palaces. Bricks used in construction are fleckered with gemstones, and there are many giant great statues made of various valuable alloys lining the streets. It is insane. There is the Gilded Vault of Opulence, which is the city center for prophecies of Kalistocracy activity. It's got their offices, bathhouse, banquet hall, sculpture garden, and, all has various stages, things to devote adherents to flaunt their personal wealth. It shows ways of flaunting wealth. So, beyond the government areas, there's also a high area for the prophecies. Because remember, it's both a government and a religion at the same time. Now, here's an important thing to say. There's virtually no crime in Curse. Because, remember the Black Jackets, the Mercenary League? They're the police. Zealots are basically in charge of the police in their cities. Their main headquarters is here. So they are devoted members of the Kalistocracy, and they guarding their homes in the streets of the capital, they take it to a new level of devotion. There are powerful magic wards protecting most buildings, bound creatures from the great beyond, diviners scrying for the slightest wrongdoing. Crime really doesn't exist in Curse. If you're going to go somewhere without crime, go to Curse. And again, pretty much the largest center for trade in all of the Inner Sea region. You get currently, again, because remember, they rebuilt their connection with the dwarfs. They get a lot of the trade from the dwarfs of the Five Kings Mountains going through the city, a lot of metal tools, weapons, and armor. But, they have access to a lot of other countries in their markets because of the Gulf of Accord going into Lake Encardian. So, again, the last thing to say about Curse is there are some other religions. There's a few mystery cults devoted to various imperial lords that have existed in the city here and there. That's the main kind of other religion that sprouts up in Curse, and it's not big. It's there occasionally. So, we can talk about some of the other locations in Curse. There's a few others I want to mention about. Not as big, of course, as good old Curse, but let's start with Dedimer. So the thing about Dedimer is it is the seat of shipbuilding. It's on the shores of Lake Encardian. It's where the major shipyards of all of Druma are. Whether this be flat-bottom barges for merchants, whether it be caravels, whether it be any other kind of military ship they need to build, even frigates. Sloops, everything is constructed and launched at this location. So there really isn't any export-import here. There's very little trade in the actual city itself. It's all about construction and maintenance of not only merchant ships, but Druma's navy. which gives them control over the Bay of Accords and effectively influence on that entire region to fight against things like pirates, refugees, smugglers, or anything. Refugees control whether they come in and see who it is. Pirates get rid of them because they're pirates. Smugglers keep them from smuggling things in. Basically, they can keep undesirables out of the Gulf of Accord and have them come in legally if they're going to do legal stuff. You know? Again, lawful neutral country. It's all about the legality. If you want to be a refugee, you probably got to apply with someone or talk to someone about it. You ain't just showing up. Won't like that at all. So, that's Denemer, a pretty important area, and it is famous for the harbor itself, which is called the Sapphire Harbor, which, again, Druma's wealth, Sapphire Harbor, it is technically partially literal. A lot of sapphires built into the harbor. Macready. Now, we talked briefly about Macready with the Macready Blade people, the ancient people that found themselves living in it. But Macready itself is a wooded town that sits in the truncle of the Great Goldpan River on the Prophet's Flow. Two major rivers here. This city here has less marketable luxury. Like, we talked about, like, the Sapphire Docks and, you know, Curse's wealth being on display. Here, they're more subtle. It is a lumber town. So what do? They show off the best and rarest woods. That's what it is. That's the thing is, Macready's loggers don't clear cut. They only go for best and rare woods. Those are what's worth harvesting. So, this big old lumber town might only process a few trees in a single day. But, here's where it comes in. Remember, the forest outside of here, Pakalar Forest, we talked about it, filled with Fae. The Druids and the Fae of the woodlands tend not to complain about this large city. That, honestly, builds a lot of themselves out of really nice wood. That's how you tell the wealth of that city. Huh, wait a second. That's made of dark wood. That's made of some other kind of rare wood. There you go. So basically, the lumber scouts in Macready maintain friendly relationship with a lot of the woodlands' Fae inhabitants, and sacrificing a few dark woods, Paloi trees, keeps it that the woodlands are mostly kept out of people's hands, and the forest stays there. It's the thing that the profits for harvesting a few rare trees, rather than, a huge mill and stuff, are better. It continues the policies of Kalistocracy's fine report of conservation of resources, and remember, they said that, conservation of resources, and long-term profit. That's where these two things come together here in Macready at the most. They have a very long-sighted approach on profit. They sell the choicest, most expensive trees, build up their place, keep on good standing with the local Fae, something the dwarfs never did, but their ancestors did back in the day. Remember, we talked about that. The Macready Blade folks did that too. And so Fae will sometimes just tell them about some of these trees. Like, hey, we're looking for some of these trees. Here's some you can have. They sacrifice a few trees, the forest stays whole, the forest stays healthy. There you go. So, a wooden town of that. But speaking of the forest, we should talk about Pakalar Forest, because it's in Druma, but it's technically not aligned with Druma, but it's not its own thing, too. It's at the center of these two big rivers, these three sections that it's kind of divided into from the Prophet's Flow and the Great Goldpan rivers, and Macready in the middle. Each of these sections is basically ruled by a different Fae court. There is one Fae court dominated by satyrs, one by nymphs, and a third by dryads. They don't really travel to each other's territories. There's common conflicts between these groups. But these three groups all tend to get along with the humans of Mercady because they don't clear-cut their forest. And that's the thing is, that keeps them on peace with all three of these courts. There's a lot of goodwill with the local Fey courts, you know? And they are a power basis in this area of Druma. And Druma, through Mercady, maintains a really good relationship with them. Petalgate. It's in the northeast. It's right against the Five Kings Mountain. Petalgate is what was once a strip mine. Played out many years ago. It's got a lot of underground forges, tunnels, and living quarters that are still inhabitants. It's a divided city. It's got the tall towers surrounded by a thick wall above and kind of dark, cramped caverns below. Very unique juxtaposition where the city is built. So the thing is, a lot of dwarfs make their home in Petalgate. These dwarfs have a reputation for being extra stubborn. As much as, you know, the dwarfs can be stubborn, it is one of the traits that tends to be generally within dwarfs. Not all of them, but plenty of them are. The ones here, their patience in deal-making bargaining is legendary. There's a Drumish saying that is, it's better to let the dwarfs of Petalgate have their way in negotiation because waiting for them to change their mind can take years. So, Petalgate dwarfs use the trade city basically to... It's open trade with Kionin, which is neighboring, and, you know, they've been using it to try to push for that, which is the Elven nation nearby. They want to trade with the elves. Open it up. But there is tense relationships between dwarfs and the Druma and the Elven nations. It's been difficult to pull off. But again, the stubbornness of the dwarfs of Petalgate basically, you know, keeps them attempting to get this relationship open. Whether or not the elves are willing for it, or they understand why the elves do not want to have that, it's little to no avail. But again, maybe someday Kionin can be convinced to have some trade with them and stuff too. But these dwarfs are kind of leading it more than the issues that happen between Druma and Kionin. But that's Petalgate. A very high population of dwarfs there. Prophet's Home. So this is located in the northeast of Druma. What it is it is the housing and training facility for the Mercenary League. So Recurse, Macready have some of the Mercenary League, but Prophet's Home is very different than those places because it's got a very utilitarian look about it. It doesn't have a lot of grandeur, doesn't have a lot of ostentation, display of wealth. It's very different from your average Drumish city. Streets are lined with oak. Most of the homes are built with quaint brick. It's got tall gray outer city walls, and it's roughly divided into this kind of figure eight with two sections, a martial district and a support district, and in the middle is a location called the Thousand Shields, a giant fortress of white stone that towers above the city. And it is the Mercenary League's headquarters for the entire country, and it counts as their main trading facility. Trees line the streets. It's very simple. There's a small tower here, of course, that's the School of the Arcane. Known by locals as the Scar. Because a lot of magical things happen there. The Mercenary League doesn't question anything they do, act as if and a lot of the locals just kind of like act as if it isn't there. You know, they keep the existence and talk about it kind of like, oh, it's there, you know. So the Scar is there too. And it's kind of ominous, you know, swirls of magical energy, clouds, weird stuff, got a bad reputation, part of the city. And of course, it's part of the entire Thousand Shields Fortress at the basically at the back end of it. It's not a white tower as part of the fortress, is the thing to say about it. It's the smallest tower in all of the Thousand Shields. Got to keep an eye on it. But that's the Mercenary League's town there, where they basically divide up the primary trading facility of the town there, of the city, of these people. It's all about building their army, basically, in a way. It is an army city. Last one we're going to talk about today is Twingate. Last town on that map there we're going to mention. And it's probably actually an important one to talk about. Because Twingate is north on the Gulf of Accord. And it's effectively a tent city. It is almost entirely made up of white canvas tents surrounding two towers that give its place its name. There's winding wooden stairs that lead to the top of these towers where they're joined with a bridge. The bridge can be demolished in case of an attack. And the people that come here are people who want to join the Prophets of Kalistocracy. That's what it is. Twin Gates to teach people. So, there's usually about 500 initiates who lecture groups of seekers maybe 10 times that size. So the population of this place fluctuates rapidly. There are those that only spend a week here. There are others spend years attempting to reach enlightenment. And twice a day, at sunset and sunrise, a horn is blown from the top of the towers, and the prophets lead the entire city in recitation of the philosophy's central tenets. So they're all in their white robes and gloves of the Kalistocracy during that time. It is a religious conversion center for a religion that is a weird mercantile cult. An unusual mercantile cult, I should really say. Weird's not the great word for it. Unusual mercantile cult. So, again, that's all it really is. A settlement for converting people to the prophecies. Now, if you want to check out some of the material I talked about here, a good place to look is the Inner Seas World Guide from Pathfinder, from Paizo. That's one of the major books. There are a couple others that I would recommend checking out to talk about these, of course. There's a few things to hit up here before we finish. We're almost done today. Campaign Settings, which is a much older book. Pathfinder Chronicles Campaign Settings which is technically D&D 3.5, but it has some information there that would be helpful for this. I don't have that book. I just got some extras for it. And then Druma, Prophets and Prophecies. So, the Campaign Setting is the only book I didn't have for this entire thing. Yep. And that kind of covers the nation culture of Druma. That kind of hits up on most of what you should know about this fairly interesting country. And again, they have their interesting relationships with other countries. They look at Mothun to their west as kind of like naive and unaware. They own a lot of Eisger. They don't really understand the Adorians because they're egalitarian ways. And they find Mercadi kind of should know their place. And of course, they eye Kyonin. But, again, Kyonin kind of keeps separate from a lot of human nations. And Green Gold is the only city in the Elven Nation that allows humans. So they send trade goods there, hoping to open up trade expansion. Hasn't really worked yet. Those dwarfs are pushing for it. But that's Druma in a nutshell. There's a lot of it that works onto the world history of Golarion. As you can see, kind of like we talked about, of course, the that's a different thing there. It's me clicking the wrong button. We talked about, of course, the dwarfs and their arrival. But their arrival shaped Druma a lot. The Earthfall shaped Druma a lot. The fact that their ancestors were Kelids shapes them. The Kelid people, nomadic, some of them are kind of barbarians, have kind of these reputations. But they've tapered it into such a way. But you can see Khalid ancestry in them still, too. Think about it. They're major military force. They still have heavy military. Granted, they're not looking for war, but they're ready. They're ready. The Black Coats are ready for what needs to happen sometimes. So, the prophecies of Kalistocracy really only exist in Druma. And honestly, it is Druma, in a way. So, let's leave it here. I think that was a good review of everything that is Druma. A very interesting country in Golarion. You certainly have people from Druma. You'd be very interesting there. Maybe someone that follows the prophecies of Kalistocracy, or followed the prophecies of Kalistocracy if you left it for some kind of reason. You could have things set in that place there. Curse is a great place for trade. Honestly, an adventure could start in Curse and go anywhere. In Druma or somewhere else, as a trade city. Plenty of people that aren't Drumans come into there. There's a lot of opening for this very unusual area. It doesn't have the overwhelming threat of death and undead that Ustalav had from our previous episode, but certainly got some interesting stories here that you can kind of enjoy and learn about. But I hope everybody did enjoy learning about Druma. I will be heading off now. Remember, every Tuesday and Thursday we talk tabletop. I've been hitting up a lot of different stuff as has been going on. If you want to see things like some of my older videos, I got a lot of stuff on YouTube, which you can certainly check out. A lot of stuff on 5e, first edition Pathfinder, and a lot of other things that it will hit you up. That's all my basically archive stuff. Anything I've had here streamed live on the channel, well, definitely check it out. Gaming streams, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. I think that's about all the shout-outs that I'm going to give today. Honestly. It's interesting to think. And here's a little thought pattern, because I was thinking about this when I did mention we are out to do Golarion as a full one day, the entire planet. Golarion is in the same multiverse as Faerun. Why? In Golarion, specifically, there is an adventure path that takes you to Earth during World War II. In older books of Forgotten Realms, Elminster visits, in the 1890s, Yellowstone National Park. Visits Earth. Earth is mentioned in Faerun. Golarion mentions Earth. Are they connected? Maybe different material planes connected together through Earth. It's a thing to think about. You certainly could do a story from 5e to Golarion, or from Pathfinder to Faerun, if you really wanted to, because of Earth. Nice little tidbit for you. And Baba Yaga, because she shows up in all three of them. Honestly, we blame Baba Yaga. She does that kind of stuff. But a little tidbit to end with there. A little thought pattern, a little experiment in the thought about this entire thing that I thought was very interesting to think about. And it helps think about the big connections between worlds sometimes that are incidental. Both worlds connected together there. But hope you enjoyed learning about Druma. I'll do more of these in the future. I got plenty more to do for talking about Pathfinder, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and all that stuff. It's fun to do. But anyway, I will get going. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Remember, Tuesday, Thursday, tabletop. Check out the YouTube channel for all that stuff. Discussing tabletop on Saturday if you want more tabletop-related stuff. And I hope all of you out there enjoyed the show, learned a few things, learned about an interesting culture, and we'll have some more of these in the future. There's plenty of very interesting countries in Golarion. But until that future, when we do talk about those in the Golarion Gazetteer, I bid all of you out there a wonderful farewell and say, till the next time. Goodbye!